In the summer of 1986, a seed company in south-central Nebraska offered $18,000 to anyone who could beat its newest corn hybrid. A 68-year-old widow entered with a dented coffee can. The company was Prairie Crown Genetics, based outside Grand Island. It was not a national giant, but in that part of Nebraska, it behaved like one. Prairie Crown sold hybrid corn to Dryland farmers from Adams County down toward the Kansas line, and its newest product, PC733, had become the seed every dealer wanted on the top shelf. The company had spent 9 years and roughly $410,000 developing it. The brochures called it Drought Aware. The plot cards called it Aggressive. The salesman called it the safest corn a man could plant in a nervous year. And in good conditions, they were not lying. PC733 stood tall. It came up even. It pollinated almost like a clock. In test plots with decent rain, it beat older local varieties by 8, 10, sometimes 13 bushels an acre. The man selling it hardest was Ray Calder. Ray was 41, clean-shaven, quick with a handshake, and trained well enough in agronomy to know exactly where his confidence came from. He carried laminated yield sheets in a leather binder. He could quote soil temperatures, germination percentages, stalk strength scores, and 3-year county averages without looking down. To most farmers, Ray sounded like the future. To Mabel Rausch, he sounded like a man who had never watched the same field suffer for 30 years. Mabel farmed 160 acres outside Red Cloud. She had been running the place alone since her husband died in 1978, but anyone who called it her husband's farm only did that once. The farm had belonged to her family before marriage, before paved roads, before chemical seed treatment, before grain trucks got big enough to block a township road. Her grandparents had come into Webster County in the 1890s with a wagon, a cook stove, a milk cow, and seed wrapped inside oilcloth. That corn had been planted in Central Europe, then in Nebraska, then on the same rise of dry ground where Mabel's house stood. Locally, people called it Rausch Yellow. It was open-pollinated dent corn, not a hybrid, not a numbered product, not protected by a tag, a dealer agreement, or a glossy photo of perfect rows. Every autumn, Mabel made next year's seed with her hands. She did not scoop kernels from the grain bin. She walked the standing corn before the combine entered the field. She carried red baling twine in the pocket of her canvas coat and tied it around the plants she wanted to keep. She looked for roots that held in wind. She looked for ears set low enough not to snap the stalk. She looked for husks that dried clean without opening too early. She looked for plants that had survived spider mites, hot nights, and weeks of empty sky. Most years, she selected between 220 and 250 ears from across the whole farm. Not the biggest ears from one corner, not the prettiest row by the road. Ears from different slopes, different soil, different stress. That mattered. Rausch yellow was not one identical plant repeated across a field. It was a population, a crowd, a family argument in leaf and pollen. Every plant looked related, but no two plants were exactly the same. Mabel dried the ears on wire racks in the granary until December. Then she shelled them by hand with an old crank sheller bolted to a bench. Tip kernels went into chicken feed. Butt kernels went into chicken feed. The middle kernels went into coffee cans, flour tins, and muslin sacks, each labeled with masking tape. Year, field, rainfall, heat, insect pressure, pollination notes. Mabel had notebooks going back to 1954. Her father had notebooks before that. The earliest ones were not neat. Some were penciled in German. Some had water stains. Some had corn dust in the folds. But they all recorded the same simple question. Which seed kept working when the year got mean? Ray Calder had tried to sell Mabel Prairie Crown corn for 5 springs. Every March, he drove down her gravel lane with a binder, a cap, and a promise. In 1982, he told her PC 612 would give her 9 more bushels. In 1983, he told her the new rootworm package would protect her stand. In 1984, he told her she was farming sentiment instead of profit. In 1985, he laid the math on her kitchen table. 160 acres, Ray said. Call it 10 extra bushels an acre. That's 1,600 bushels. At $3 and change, you are leaving more than $5,000 in the field. Mabel poured coffee into 2 cups and pushed one toward him. Ray, she said, you keep counting what your corn makes when the year behaves. I count what mine keeps when it doesn't. Ray smiled, because that sounded like stubbornness, and salesmen are trained to outlast stubbornness. But Mabel was not stubborn in the way Ray thought. She was not against hybrids. She planted a few bags of commercial corn on her bottom ground some years. She liked good tools. She respected research. What she did not trust was sameness pretending to be safety. In January of 1986, Prairie Crown held a dealer supper at the National Guard Hall in Hastings. The company served roast beef, potatoes, and coffee in foam cups. After dinner, Ray stood in front of 200 farmers and announced a public yield challenge. 2 half-acre plots at the county fairground, same planting date, same planter, same fertilizer, same extension agent measuring the crop. Prairie Crown PC 733 against any local seed a farmer dared to bring. If the local seed out-yielded PC 733, Prairie Crown would pay $18,000 in cash. If Prairie Crown won, the farmer owed nothing except the courage to be wrong in public. Ray did not say Mabel's name from the microphone. He did not have to. Half the room looked toward the back, where Mabel sat with her arms folded and her coat still on. By Monday morning, feed stores had the poster in their windows. Beat our hybrid, win $18,000. By Friday, the coffee shop had turned it into a county sport. Someone asked Ray whether Mabel Rausch's old corn could enter. Ray laughed. "Open-pollinated corn had its day," he said. "So did kerosene lamps. We don't farm by lamp anymore." That line traveled faster than the poster. Mabel heard it at the elevator. She did not answer there. She drove home, walked into the granary, and set one dented blue coffee can on the workbench. It had once held 3 pounds of ground coffee. Now it held enough Rausch yellow to plant the contest plot. On February 14th, she carried that can into the Fair Board office and signed the entry form. The secretary looked at the line marked Seed Variety. Rausch Yellow Dent, Family Strain, Dryland Selection since approximately 1896. Then she looked at the can. "Is that your entry seed?" Mabel nodded. "All of it?" "Enough of it," Mabel said. The plots were planted on May 6th. The extension agent, Arnold Pike, put the 2 half-acre strips side by side along the north edge of the fairground. Prairie Crown seed came in a bright treated bag, blue dye on the kernels, tags stapled clean, lot number printed in black ink. Mabel's seed came out of the coffee can, pale yellow, uneven in size, some kernels wider than others, some slightly deeper, all of them carrying the same dust from her granary bench. Both plots got the same fertilizer, 110 pounds of nitrogen per acre, banded before planting. Both were planted by the same 4-row planter, same depth, same spacing, same afternoon. By June, the contest looked ridiculous. PC 733 was beautiful. Every plant seemed to have been measured with a ruler. Same height, same leaf angle, same deep green color. You could stand at one end and see a clean tunnel of modern breeding. Mabel's plot looked like a field trying to remember several different songs at once. Some plants were taller, some were shorter. A few were late. The color was lighter. The rows did not have that catalog shine. Ray brought dealers by and let them see the difference. "That's what progress looks like," he said, pointing to the hybrid. Then he pointed at Mabel's rows. "And that's what progress replaced." The dealers laughed, because in June, the joke looked safe. But June is not the month that decides dryland corn. July is. The first week of July came hot. The second came hotter. By the third, the afternoon wind had turned hard and dusty, and the rain gauges around Red Cloud were holding less than half their normal moisture. The fairground soil cracked along the wheel tracks. Corn leaves began to roll. In the Prairie Crown plot, the stress arrived like a command. Every plant answered at the same time. Leaves curled at the same angle. Growth slowed at the same height. Tassels pushed late in one even wave. That was the hidden risk inside uniformity. When every plant is built to respond the same way, a field can look strong right up until the moment it weakens together. Mabel's plot did not weaken together. Some plants curled early. Some stayed open through the afternoon. Some threw tassels first. Some waited. Some stalks looked tired enough to quit. Others kept a waxy blue cast on the leaves and held their posture through the wind. To a man selling pictures, the field looked messy. To a woman who had spent 32 years selecting seed after bad summers, it looked like insurance. The real damage came during pollination. Corn has to make a meeting between tassel and silk. Pollen falls for a short time. Silk has to be ready to catch it. When drought separates those two events, the ear loses kernels that never form. PC 733 had been bred for synchronized strength. In normal moisture, that made it efficient. In July of 1986, it made the failure synchronized too. A large share of the pollen shed before the silks were fully ready. The ears still formed, but the tips were bare and the rows skipped. Rausch yellow spread the risk across time. Because the plants were not identical, their pollination was not identical. Pollen kept coming in waves. Early plants covered early silks. Later plants covered late silks. Weak plants gave little. Strong plants gave more. The population did not perform like a machine. It performed like a neighborhood during a power outage, each house finding a different way to keep one light on. By August, Ray stopped bringing dealers to the plots. Mabel still came twice a week. She split husks with her thumbnail. She counted filled rows. She rolled ears in her palm and listened to the kernels click. She did not tell anyone what she thought. She had learned long ago that a field will punish a person for celebrating before the grain is dry. The harvest was set for Saturday, September 6th, the last day of the county fair. By then, the challenge had grown into something larger than a seed contest. Farmers drove in from 3 counties. A local radio station parked near the grandstand. Children climbed the fence rails. Nearly 600 people stood around a half-acre of corn, waiting to see whether a company check would become a lesson. Ray arrived early in a prairie crown shirt pressed so flat it looked new from the store. He spoke to people, shook hands, and kept glancing toward the plots. He knew the hybrid had suffered. Everyone could see that. But he also knew what the data said. PC 733 had beaten old local corn in plot after plot. One dry spell did not erase 9 years of breeding. At least, that was what he told himself. Mabel arrived in work boots, gray trousers, and a faded chambray shirt. She carried the blue coffee can under one arm. Someone asked why she brought it. She said, "It started this. It ought to hear the ending." Arnold Pike harvested the Prairie Crown plot first. The combine moved slowly through the rows. Grain rattled into the weigh wagon. Arnold tested moisture, adjusted the number, checked the scale twice, and wrote the result on a card. Then he harvested Mabel's plot with the same combine, same wagon, same meter, same adjustment. The crowd stopped talking when Arnold climbed onto the small stage by the announcer's booth. Ray stood with his binder tucked under his arm. Mabel stood 20 feet away, both hands around the coffee can. Arnold read the first card. Prairie Crown PC 733, 82 bushels per acre, adjusted. A murmur went through the crowd. 82 was not a disaster in that year. Some fields had done worse, but it was not the kind of number a company prints in a brochure. Arnold turned the second card over. Rausch Yellow Dent, 97 bushels per acre, adjusted. For 1 second, the fairground did not understand what it had heard. Then the noise hit. Not applause exactly, a shout. The sound of farmers watching a rule break in front of them. 15 bushels per acre. The old corn had not merely survived the challenge, it had beaten the modern hybrid by enough to change the argument. On Mabel's 160 acres, 15 bushels meant 2,400 extra bushels. At that year's local price, it was more than $6,000 of grain, almost the exact amount Ray had once told her she was losing by keeping her own seed. Only now, the math pointed the other way. And the fairground plot was not an accident. Across nearby dryland farms that planted PC 733 heavily, county estimates came in around 76 to 80 bushels. Mabel's home farm averaged 91. Not as high as the contest strip, but still far ahead of the neat rows that had looked unbeatable in June. The dry year had revealed what the good years hid. PC 733 had one excellent answer for the right season. Mabel's corn carried many imperfect answers for the wrong one. Prairie Crown paid the money. They had to. The rules were public. The measurement was clean. The crowd had heard the numbers from the extension agent. Ray drove the check to Mabel's farm the following Tuesday. He did not bring a dealer. He did not bring a photographer. He parked by the granary, walked to the back door, and handed her an envelope. 18,000, he said. Mabel opened it, looked at the check, and set it on the table without smiling. Ray stood there for a moment, embarrassed by her calm. In a wet year, he said, PC 733 wins. Mabel nodded. Probably. Bat made it worse. Ray had expected gloating. Gloating would have let him dislike her. Instead, she gave him the truth. Then why enter? He asked. Mabel tapped the coffee can with one knuckle. Because you weren't selling a wet year, she said. You were selling safety. Safety can't only work when the weather cooperates. Ray looked out her kitchen window toward the granary. She went on. Your corn is like one key cut very clean. When it fits the lock, it opens fast. Mine is a whole ring of old keys. Most of them rattle. Some of them don't fit anything. But when the lock changes, one of them may still turn. Ray did not answer. That was the part his binder had not measured. Hybrid vigor was real. Uniformity was useful. Research mattered. But sameness had a shadow. And the shadow showed up exactly when farmers could least afford it. Mabel used the prize money to build a seed room inside the north end of her granary. It was not fancy. 2 insulated walls, a small window air conditioner, a dehumidifier, wooden shelves, metal cabinets rescued from a closed school, coffee cans, glass jars, paper envelopes, muslin sacks, all labeled in her square handwriting. She stored Rausch yellow there, but she did not stop with her own corn. She traded with older farmers who still had family seed in sheds. She wrote to seed exchanges. She saved flour corn, flint corn, white dent, red dent, short season corn, long season corn, odd ears with deep roots, or late silk, or heavy husks. By 1994, that room held 118 open-pollinated corn strains and 37 years of Mabel's notes. Each one was a key. A few were poor yielders. A few were beautiful and useless. A few were only important because they carried one trait that might matter later: a deeper root, a longer pollen window, a harder kernel, a tolerance for hot nights, a habit of staying green when other plants gave up. Mabel was not trying to drag farming backward. That was the mistake people made when they wanted the story to be simple. She did not hate hybrids. After the contest, she even planted prairie crown corn on part of her bottom ground in 2 good years. Because a good tool in the right place is still a good tool. What she hated was the idea that one tool should replace the whole shed. Ray Calder understood that better than anyone. He stayed with Prairie Crown another 3 years, then left to become an independent crop advisor. His recommendations changed after 1986. He still recommended hybrids. He still used yield data. He still believed in modern breeding. But he stopped telling farmers to plant one number across every acre. He began telling them to divide risk. Match hybrids to field type. Keep a small plot of something different. Save local seed if they had it. Do not let a farm become one answer waiting for one question. He never used Mabel's name in the sales pitch. He did not need to. Anyone who had stood at the county fair in 1986 already knew where the lesson came from. Mabel farmed until 1998, when her knees finally refused the combine steps. Her niece took over the land and kept 2 acres of Rausch yellow in production every year. Not because it always made the most money, but because living seed has to be lived with. It cannot be preserved like a photograph and expected to keep learning. When Mabel died in 2007, the coffee can from the contest sat on a table near the church guest book. It was scratched, faded, and empty except for one ear tag from the 1986 plot. People who came through the line touched the lid as if it were a relic. But Mabel would have disliked that. To her, the can was not holy. The seed was not magic. The point was never that old things always beat new things. The point was that land keeps asking different questions. A company can breed a brilliant answer. A lab can sharpen it. A salesman can prove it in a good year. But a farm that has survived long enough knows better than to carry only one answer. Prairie Crown sold a perfect key for one perfect lock. Mabel kept the whole ring. And in the year the weather changed the lock, the old coffee can opened the door.